already.
He was afraid. He knew I was coming.
Thanks, Walter.
So we're going to do the discussion first?
Come on down. First we should introduce Tony Temple.
Yeah.
EMC.
I can introduce myself, sorry.
This is Tony Temple. We say he is arguably the farthest distance regular customer because he comes from the UK here every year. And he works hard and he's done a great job on this. I don't want to say anything more. You got it.
All yours. Thanks, Billy. Hi, everybody. My name's Tony Temple, as you've just learned. I'm not a native American. I'm from England. The first thing I need to do is I need to apologise for my garish graphics. My wife said to me it looked like a bad, what do you call them, the things they have on Fox News, you know, those infographics they have. So if anybody's struggling with the colours, I can only apologise, but you know, it'll be fine. So we're here today to talk about an arcade game. The arcade game's called Aztarac. And we're going to be talking about a guy called Tim Stryker, who was the guy who wrote the game. We're delighted that Tim's family are here, so we have the entire clan. I won't even try and start to remember who you all are, but we have Tim's kids, we have Tim's wife, Tim's sister, and we're delighted you guys are here, so thank you for coming. Thanks very much. So where to start with this story? So I write a blog called arcadeblogger.com, and I'm constantly on the lookout for interesting stories to do with arcade machines, classic arcade machines. And last year here at Free Play Florida, I bumped into this knucklehead here, Neil, and he kind of secretly pulled me to one side and went, "Hey, come and look at this," and showed me a picture of this arcade cabinet on his phone. And that arcade cabinet turned out to be Aztarac. And he told me a few things about how he came about finding this arcade machine. And I thought I really need to write this story, and because the tale is fascinating. It's amazing. It's probably the most human story I've ever told on the blog, and I think the tale came out very well. And we got talking, and I did some research on Aztarac, and what I discovered was the Tim Stryker, who is no longer with us, was a lot more than just Aztarac, and Aztarac was just a very small sort of snapshot in his life, and what I wanted to do was just share that tale with you. Aztarac was produced by a company called Century, who were local to here. They were based in, is it Hialeah? Hialeah here in Florida. Originally they were called Allied Leisure, and Allied Leisure were formed in 1968, and they produced and built many electromechanical games in the late 60s and throughout the 70s. And then they hit 1980, and as we all know, which is why we're all here, the video game craze was going mad, and they thought we really need to, you know, get on that bandwagon. We really need to start making games, video games. So they grabbed hold of a guy and they recruited him. His name was Ken Beuck, B-E-U-C-K, and they got Ken in, and Ken acted as a consultant, and he started looking at the company from top to bottom. And Allied Leisure had 400 employees, and he sat them all down individually and he asked them what they all did within the company. And what he discovered was that a significant proportion of them said, "Well, I come into the factory once a week and I pick up my wages and then I go home, and no one really asks me what I do or why I'm here, and I just pick up a salary." So he rebranded the company. They decided the name Century was a suitable name for driving the business into the new era of video games. He trimmed the company right down. The number of people employed by then Century reduced from 400 to 200. And he made quite a few changes, and a significant change was they decided to base their business model on licensed games. Now, for you non-arcade nerds, what a licensed game is essentially is you will go to somewhere like Japan, you will talk to a Japanese video game company who have not got distribution of their game here in the US, and you will buy the rights to manufacture and produce and build and release the game over here in the US. So that's a licensed game. What that meant was their costs were significantly reduced. So if you think about Atari, they had a building full of very clever people who were creating games and making games, and they all had to be paid a salary. Those things took time. So what Century thought would be a great idea would be, well, why do we need to write our own games? There's all these great games being released in Japan. They want to make money here in the US. They haven't got manufacturing facilities. It's great for them, it's great for us. We just pay them some money. They send us a load of printed circuit boards. All we need to do is build cabinets. And so they started getting very smart about building cabinets and reducing costs and making these things in a much more cost-effective way. One of the things they changed was during the time of Allied Leisure, they were building every single nut and bolt and part and woodwork and metal and wiring and lights and monitors there within the factory. And what they realised, well, actually, why are we trying to build all this stuff ourselves when we could probably place a big order with an external company for 5,000 coin doors and acquire these things far cheaper than actually trying to make them ourselves. So they were very smart, and they were lean and mean, and here's some of the games they released. You can actually play some of these out there on the show floor. You'll all be familiar with Phoenix, Eagle, Vanguard, Time Pilot, the fantastic Gyrus there, and on the right hand side, Track and Field, which we all spent far too much money on as kids, and sore fingers and all that kind of stuff. They were around from 1980 until 1984. In their first year, this graph on the right is their revenues in millions of dollars. It goes 61, 14, 32, and 20 from 81 to 84. I guess the point I wanted to make here was you have to remember what was going on between 81 and 84. Arcade sales were up and down. All of these companies were only as good as their last release. Every company had, classic games. Every company had disasters that just didn't work out commercially. And what you can see from here is that Century had a real roller coaster ride. They had a fabulous first year, and in fact, $61 million was more revenue than Allied Leisure had generated in the previous 12 years. That just kind of gives you an idea of, the video game craze in 1980, and boom, there you go. Second year, not so good. Third year went up a bit, and 84 again, kind of down slightly. But they were regarded as a top 6 manufacturer in 1981, massive success, and they've released, arguably some of the best classic arcade games that we all know and love now. So what about Tim? Well, Tim was fascinated with computers from a very early age. He was a computer programmer. He lived in Connecticut in his younger years, and he had some success in writing his own software and releasing it within Connecticut. But what he really wanted to do was to be a computer engineer, and so he moved down to Florida and joined Century in 1982. And this is the interesting thing. So I mentioned earlier about Century licensing games. They didn't have in-house programmers. They didn't write their own games. They just went and bought them from overseas, licensed them and released them. So Tim's game, Aztarac, was one of only 4 arcade titles that Century created in-house. So they had a guy at a desk in front of a computer who programmed their own game. And so Tim joined in 1982. I've put the point there, means to an end. I mean, it could be I'm making a bit of poetic license here, but talking to Tim's family, they've been very, very kind and shared us all sorts of things. But I very much got a sense that becoming a video game programmer wasn't Tim's kind of, goal in life. And he really saw it as a stepping stone to something much bigger. And I just wanted to read to you an excerpt from a letter which Tim wrote to his father, Jerry, in May 1982. So just bear with me, but it kind of gives you a sense of what he was about. You'll no doubt be alarmed to hear that I'll be starting work shortly as a video game designer. Please don't feel too bad about it. As I think I told you, I've really been trying hard to get a job as a computer architect, but to no avail. So what I say is fine. If all of these dingbats in their three-piece suits don't want the services of a hard-working fellow like me, who happens to be capable of designing them the best goddamn microprocessor there ever was, then fine. Meanwhile, I'll see if I can't scare up some interest in some other field. The video games might seem like going in the opposite extreme, but it is big business. And I know of no other areas in which one's ability to produce is so severely tested or so readily apparent when present. I've come to the realization that nobody is ready to believe that you're worth half a crap, pardon my French, unless and until they see firsthand that it's the case. Designing a few hit video games can perhaps result in the conveyance of that first-hand knowledge to a sizable fraction of the engineering population. Then watch out. And he signs off and says, if I'm angry, it's because I am. So, clearly Tim had an idea and video games probably wasn't it, but I guess he figured he's going to write this game, he's going to make it the best, most unbelievable game he can possibly write. He's going to put his heart and soul into it, and he's going to produce something very special. Someone's going to notice, they're going to give him a job, he's then going to go and pursue his real goals. Population 1, again what I meant there, you have to remember who Century were. They weren't Atari, so they didn't have great big development studios. Century released games, but they did it on a budget. So we don't know for sure, but I would speculate that Tim was doing this on his own. He was sitting at a desk and he was putting his own heart and soul and blood, sweat and tears into this game. And arguably he was in it a deep end. Video games was and probably still is a very cutthroat business. And I think for a young guy to go into a company, get the job, and I can imagine he literally walked in on his first day and he said, well, hey Tim, nice to see you on your first day. There's your desk, there's your computer, we're going to see you in 6 months, knock it out the park. Yeah, I think it takes a certain kind of person to kind of, step up to the plate in that way. So what is Aztarac? What is this game we're talking about? Aztarac is a vector game. Us arcade nerds probably know the difference between a vector and a raster monitor. For those of you who don't, a raster monitor will essentially draw lines from left to right, much in the same way you read a book, very, very fast, refreshes and refreshes. So a game like Pac-Man, a game like Defender, a game like Missile Command uses raster technology. A vector game is very different. It essentially draws lines from one point on the monitor to another very, very quickly, and it draws them so fast that you can't see the drawing happening. So all you see are solid lines. What that means is you end up with a very vibrant game. If you turn the lights down on a vector game, there's a real soul to the game. It really glows out of the screen and comes up with. It's just a very special thing to play. Go out and play a vector game out there, and you'll see what I mean. The technology Tim chose to use, and again, it's just, I would imagine, just a measure of who Tim was. He didn't dial it in. He didn't just think, well, I'm just going to sit here and knock a game out and then kind of move on to something else. He produced something very, very special, without question. All of the technology he was using was very cutting edge. The vector monitor that you'll find, which we'll be talking about later on, within the machine was absolute cutting edge. Most colour vector games use a 6100 monitor, which you'll find in a Tempest and a Black Widow, some of the more well-known colour vector games. Aztarac uses like the next model up, and it was kind of, you know, brand new, just being released, and it means it refreshes things much faster, the graphics are much more vibrant. So again, I can only imagine what it was like for Tim to go to the management of Centurion and say, I want that monitor, because that would have been a horrendously expensive piece of kit, but clearly he wanted the game to be exactly what he had visioned in his mind, and he went to Centurion and he said, this is what I want, you know, I want cutting edge stuff, otherwise I'm not going to do it, presumably. It also has a very complex control system. I don't know if you can make it there on the image that you see on the screen. On the right hand side you have a sort of fighter pilot type joystick, which are kind of left, right, up and down. And you also have two buttons. We'll come onto the gameplay. We'll come onto the gameplay shortly. Another very unique feature of the game is the fisheye lens, which is on the monitor bezel. So whereas most video games have just a flat plastic bezel to protect the screen, what Aztarac has is like a sort of fisheye lens. It's like a sort of bulb, fish bowl sticking out, and you'll see very shortly what effect that has on the graphics. But again, it's something very simple, but it's just such a beautiful touch to the game, and you'll be able to see that shortly. And again, it's probably worth bearing in mind market conditions in '83 when the game was released. Tough times out there. Things were going horribly wrong for the arcade video game market. So, excuse me. So this was a bit of a trial by fire, I would suggest. And again, you know, for a guy prepared to put his name to a game that's going out into a market full of crocodiles, you know, I'd say it was a pretty brave move. So I've pulled this video off of YouTube. You'll be able to see just how vibrant the graphics are very shortly on the actual game. Okay, I just want to kind of wait for something to happen. Here we go. And of course, what you can't see is that what that says there is designed by Tim Stryker. Again, it's just another interesting piece of minutiae. Most games that were released by the Ataris and the Williams of this world, whilst they had superstar programmers that we all know now, no one was allowed to put their name to a game and for their name to appear on the screen for players to see who those people were. Part of that was just, well, that's just how things were, but another part of it was all of the video game companies were very paranoid about their best programmers being poached. So the reason why you don't see Dave Toyer's name all over Missile Command is not because he was shy, but because Atari simply wouldn't allow it. They would not have their star programmers putting their name in a game and having it appear on screen. Again, Tim, guy's making a statement with this video game. He wants it to happen. He's going to stick his name on this game, you know, come hell or high water, and that's exactly what he did. Gameplay. So essentially what you're doing is you're protecting 4 star bases, which you can see there as 4 diamond shapes. In the middle there, this is your tank. And not only can you move the tank around the screen, but you can also move the turret independently of the movement of the tank. And if you just look at the detail of the game, you can see how much time and effort and love and blood and sweat and tears that this guy put into this game. The other thing I wanted to mention, because I've been guessing it's moved on, was again at the start of the game, I don't know if you noticed the scrolling marquee of instructions. Again, you know, 81, 82, 83, the expectation of a video game was, well, you just put a quarter in and then you started playing and you quickly picked up what to do. Pac-Man's a great example. It doesn't take a genius to work out what Pac-Man was, but the almost sort of cinema-like introduction to the game of the scrolling instructions. You know, it's almost like a sort of start of a Star Wars film. You know, again, so you know, level of detail. This guy wants to make a statement. You know, this game is, you know, advertising him as a programmer. So we could sit here and watch the game, but obviously that wouldn't be terribly interesting. So that was the game, and you know, it really was quite something. Sadly, Aztarac didn't sell terribly well. Colour vector monitors and colour vector games kind of disappeared as quickly as they came. Operators didn't like them. They were constantly breaking down. And if you notice, there's a Quantum out there. It's been dead all weekend. You know, you just have to look the wrong way at a colour vector monitor and it'll go pop. I have a Tempest at home and I spend more time with my back inside it with the camera on, with my torch, trying to fix the damn thing instead of actually playing it. In terms of production numbers, I had a conversation with Tim's sister, hi Terry, and we were having a bit of a debate about how many of these games were actually released, and she was told 500 Aztaracs were produced. If you look at their report and accounts, which I'd love to show you, but you would be so bored if I did that, but within Centuri's report and accounts, it does break down machine sales. And if you kind of make a guesstimate of what they sold the machine for and divided that into their total revenue and sort of played around with it, I came up with a number of 200. So the release numbers, let's just say they're in the hundreds, not in the thousands. So sadly, it wasn't a commercial success. So what did Tim do? Well, Tim went on to form his own company called Galacticon, and it was there really that, you know, Tim's abilities came to the fore, and he started developing very complex computer programs, which led on to major BBS, which involved real-time teleconferencing, online gaming, and indeed the sort of precursor to what we now know as internet forums. And as I understand it, I'm no computer tech head, but as I understand it, this was the sort of first bulletin board software that you could dial into using a very early modem, and you could have dialogue with other people online, and indeed you could play online games. Tim also was, I guess, something of a visionary, and I kind of guess Ace could maybe tell us a little bit more about this, but Tim was clearly a great thinker, had a lot in his mind that he wanted to get out, and had a great deal of opinions about the world and the way it was run, and he had this thing called super democracy, which is where essentially what he envisioned was a time and a place where people could discuss politics online and indeed vote online, and basically cut out the middleman. You know, in other words, all these idiots in Washington and London, just kind of get rid of them and let's just let the people work it out for themselves. I kind of wonder what he would make of where we've got to now with kind of Facebook and you know, the whole online thing. But I guess, you know, with a great mind comes perhaps a bit of trouble, and Tim very sadly took his own life in 1996. So I'm now going to hand over to Neil, because we are going to fast forward. So that was the 80s and 90s. Sorry, Neil, just a bit of sort of prep. That was the 80s and 90s, and arcade games disappeared. They ended up in dusty warehouses. And where we've got to now is there's now a great deal of interest in these great machines. As you can see, this is why we're all here. And there are mad people like me and Neil and these guys up here who go out and find and restore and build arcade machines. And that's where Neil is going to pick up.
It was a dark and stormy night. I am so nervous right now. And I just said, you know what, if I say this, I'll probably break it off a little bit, you know, break the ice. So yeah, I started this whole mess. So before finding the Aztarac, I'm sitting down in a friend's office at Arcade Odyssey in Miami, and the gentleman's name is Rick Medina. And I go to his office every once in a while, and we start talking about games and whatnot. But this one day, we were talking about extremely rare arcades. And mind you, this is 4 or 5 months before this machine comes up. And with the conversation with Rick, we were talking about Warlord cocktails, which you may see that they're in the show. We spoke about an Aztarac. You know, the list went on and on. But Rick told me, this is what caught my eye, he goes, well, Aztarac was made in Hialeah. And I go, what? He goes, yeah, this Aztarac was made by Centauri. I'm like, well, it caught my attention because I knew of Centauri in Hialeah for making games like Circus Charlie, Phoenix, Time Pilot, but never Aztarac. And I was born and raised in Hialeah. I knew that the factory was about 10 minutes away from my home, so I was just shocked that I never heard about it. So between me and Rick, he basically said, well, if you ever find one, I'd be interested in one. I'm like, yeah, okay. And he himself was like, yeah, you're not going to find it. I'm like, oh, okay. And about 3 weeks later, after that conversation between me and Rick, I received a phone call that an arcade operator, is closing down his business out in West Palm Beach. Danny and myself would pick up a U-Haul truck and we head up to West Palm, and we ended up picking up about 20 machines. The operator was so nice, he was just like, take all of this and take this bag of keys. And literally, it was just a bag of keys, just a massive amount of keys. And in that batch in the bag was the keys to a Circus Charlie, in which we picked up in that batch. But when we're going through the detail in the storage, we noticed that the key that said Circus Charlie, when we put it in Circus Charlie, it would go in, but it didn't work. So I just told Danny, I go, look, it's just a broken lock. We'll just throw away the lock and keep the keys. And that's what happened. I put the keys in the bag like everybody else, and that's it. So it gets to a point where, I'm not sure if Joe's here, but the Circus Charlie was sold to Joe. These are all my notes, sorry guys. And in July 2016, approximately a month later, the Aztarac was posted for sale. Within 1 or 2 hours of the person posting it, I made contact with the seller and arranged to see it. I arrived the next day with my U-Haul trailer and myself with Danny, and long story short, we got beat. And somebody was there, and I'm not going to go into too much details, but I managed to convince the guy. I gave him the good Hialeah lip. I didn't say I was going to kick his butt, but I just, I managed to convince him that this wasn't the project for him. And we bought it, and then we brought it back to storage. And that's where things got interesting. While I was organizing the storage, inside the storage, Danny's outside with the machine, and mind you, I gave the task of Danny going through these 100 keys. He must have hated me for God knows. But I did tell him, and I go, listen, I know that the Circus Charlie key's in there. Like, I know it's in there. There's 2 of them. There's 2 keys in there. It had a Circus Charlie. It said Circus Charlie. And just go ahead and figure it out. And while I'm in the storage organizing this, it didn't take Danny 5 minutes. All I hear out of Danny's mouth was, 1! And I'm like, what? And his response was, 1! And I'm like, what are you talking about, Danny? Like, it didn't make any sense. Yeah, it didn't make any sense. And I had to go outside, and when I see what's happening, Danny, I remember Danny having his right hand was holding the coin door, and he goes, dude, you gotta see this. I said, well, what am I seeing? And he goes, look at the coin meter, and he opens it. And the coin mag said 00001. And I asked Danny, how did you open it? And he goes, with the keys. I'm like, wow, I mean, did you fake the lock? And he goes, oh, this was like in and done. And I was just like, yeah, so it wasn't the Hialeah way of like with a crowbar or anything like that, But it was literally a exact key. Now, us collectors, we know that there's a terminology called faking the lock, where you use another key and just kind of jimmy it, and then you keep playing with it. Sure enough, it'll open. And that wasn't what happened. It just literally went in all the way. So this lock from a Circus Charlie ended up working on an Aztarac, and it worked. So I didn't have to drill it. Inside the machine was the new condition report. There was a pink delivery form. There's a sales invoice. There's a goodie bag, what we call a goodie bag, which basically had 4 leg levelers, a fuse, little spare parts for the operators just in case something would go bad. And it was in there sealed. And on top of the game, there's an actual photo. It says, there's like a cardboard sign that says new game. Well, that was actually still down, never used. Let me see something here. Yeah. Can you go to the next photo?
Which one do you want to do, that or that?
Yeah, that.
Yep.
So we end up finding it. The only thing is I couldn't figure out how to turn it on. I mean, the PCB was there, the power supply was there, monitor, I had a light bulb turn on, but I couldn't figure it out. I called up my Calgary, which was a couple guys. I called Rick. The first one in line was Rick, and I told Rick, look, I can't figure this out. I remember calling Marcel, the 8-man. He went over there to the storage, and he was just like mind blown because we couldn't figure out what we were seeing, and we just weren't getting anything. It was just like not working. And next thing you know, I just I had to make decisions of what I was going to be doing with it. The photos that you see there, Danny always being attention to detail. Danny was like, well, did you notice the bottom of the machine? I said, no. And he goes, it's near mint. I said, are you serious? He goes, yeah. So he goes, do me a favor, take a picture of me of the bottom of the cabinet. I'm like, okay, cool. So I took a picture of it, and that's Danny with his thumbs up showing that the bottom of the cabinet was immaculate. There was no water damage or any termites of anything. Yeah, the bottom was the first thing that gets torn up in a game, and this was intact. It was really clean. So then the famous Billy Mays photo here that I look like Billy Mays from OxyClean. The photo with the 2 thumbs up that I come out in, it wasn't to showboat. It was to prove Rick that I got the machine. And what happened was, before that, you saw the pictures of the Aztarac, the sides. Well, those pictures of the sides were what I sent to Rick first. And Rick's response was like, yeah, you didn't get anything. I could go Google Aztarac photos myself. That was one of those, yeah, get out of here. And I'm like, so Danny was like, he doesn't believe you got it. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. He doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe it at all. I think he probably hates me right now for messing with him. He's probably busy. And sure enough, Danny's like, well, stand right in front of it, take 2 photos, with your thumbs up, and take the photo.
Sounds like a little bit of showboating to me.
Yeah, exactly, right. So I went and I stuck it to Rick, So I went and I stuck it to Rick, and we sent the photo, and that's the photo I sent to Rick. Well, Rick called me back within about 30 seconds. So that works, right? So about 30 seconds later, Rick called me, and he said, like, are you serious? And I'm like, I'm dead serious. And then from there, I explained to him the findings, and then this is where it snowballed, and it just went from there. The whole state of Florida must have called me because my phone just wouldn't stop. It was just one after the other, one collector after the other congratulating me, and then I got basically I started getting all the crazy offers, and I just decided to stick with 2 offers. One was Rick's and the other one was Jonathan's. I really wanted the machine to stay here in Florida, and one promise that Jonathan actually has kept, and I have to back him up on it. The machine is actually here in Free Play, Florida. I asked him, if you have to have this machine in Free Play, Florida, working or not, it's got to be here. The world has to see this machine. And he delivered, and it's here, and I guess we have to go to the repair side now because I didn't do any of the repairs. So, yeah, those are the first, go back one. Those were the photos I sent to Rick, and then he wiped it, what with it. Yeah, no, it's pretty clean.
Yep.
I think you guys keep going.
Yep. Do you want me to cover the repair?
I thought Jonathan was going to do it.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'll get into some of that. So, I think it was just a...
go back, we forgot
Do you want to come back to that?
Yeah, we forgot to show that.
Okay.
The family, after we were in communications, they found about Tony's blog. We were communicating back and forth, and this is the first time publicly that this photo is being shown. So that's Tim, and the Aztarac's behind him. And I don't know who's in the arcade, but there's a child playing there. I think it's Ace. So it's Ace. That's Tim Stryker's son. So that's at one point, I don't know what day it was, but they were playing Aztarac, father and son.
Thank you, family, for that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ace was really keen for me to just say that Tim didn't always dress like that. Apparently this was was this Halloween night you were saying? I said? He's very keen for me to say it's not how you dress it. But yeah, well, I mean, what a great photo. Thanks so much for showing it. Ace. It's great.
So yeah, at this point, I think it was 2 or 3 days after you found the game,
Yeah.
and Neil and I went from not knowing each other to talking for probably a couple hours.
Yeah.
Brian, I know the dots are connected through Brian. I think
Yes.
Neil said something to Brian.
I end up, I text Brian and say, "Are you busy?" And he's like, "No." And I said, "You got to call me." So he calls me because I know he works multiple hours. And Brian calls me up and I go, "Brian, are you sitting down?" And he goes, "No." And I go, "Okay, do me a favor, sit down." And he's like, "Are you sure?" And I'm like, "Dude, sit down." And he sat, and he goes, "I'm sitting down, now what?" And I go, "Okay, I got the Aztarac." And he goes, "No, you didn't." I said, "Yes, I did. But there's something else with it." And he goes, "What? It's got termites or something?" I go, "No, it belonged to Tim Stryker." And he goes, "What?" And the first thing out of Brian's mouth was like, "It's a miracle! It's a miracle!" Or the phone, "It's a miracle!" And I'm like, okay. I mean, I didn't know he would get so, happy about it, but that, and then one thing led to another. Brian calls Jonathan. He's like, Neil pulls off a miracle, right? And that's how me and Jonathan have the connection.
Yeah, so I've been collecting and saving and helping to make these vector games that break so easily and often work again, and have invested in specific projects and long-term projects to make vector survive. Most arcade games ultimately can survive because they're raster games. The boards can be reproduced, and even if the monitors can't be reproduced, we can begrudgingly replace them with LCDs. We don't like to do that, but it's an option. That is not an option for a vector game. And so, for example, one of the projects that I've been working on for a couple of years, which we've been talking about as a collection community for at least 15 years, is an ability to convert raster monitors, raster tubes, into vector monitors, which we're now doing. I have a monitor at my house, which was originally a raster arcade game monitor, which we successfully converted to a vector monitor with a brand new reproduction board set to drive the monitor, and rewinding what's called the yoke, which drives the thing that's drawing inside the game. And so vectors is what I do, and Brian connected us, I think, because he knew that I spent a lot of time with vectors, and Neil had this amazing find. We drove down, Ben Souders and I, and my friend Quan, from Orlando to Hialeah.
It was Durham.
Yeah.
I moved up. I went to
You
Durham.
moved up.
Because everybody's like, "Oh, Hialeah is the ghettos." No, I live in Durham.
Got the game, brought it back to our warehouse, and started digging into the game, doing an initial triage, initial diagnosis. And my conclusion very quickly was that somebody had either tried to repair or sabotage the game previously. And why do I say sabotage? Well, I think it was about 6 years ago, there was briefly some talk on the online forums that an Aztarac had been found in Florida, but it wasn't working. And somebody volunteered to go try to get it working, and then it was all sort of forgotten about. And I got the game. It was in a very odd condition. The cables were upside down on the game. Fortunately, Centuri designed it such that if you plug the cables in, what's called the harness, upside down on this game, it wouldn't damage it. But the processor was missing from the game. And if you're going to take one component out of a game to make it look like it doesn't work at all, taking the processor out is the way to do it. So it was a little odd that the boards were in this condition. But we did some initial testing. We looked at voltages. We looked at some of the chips. And I very quickly decided, this is too rare and too unique. I am not going to proceed. I'm getting on a plane with this board on my carry-on, and I'm taking it to Andrew Welburn, who is the world expert on repairing Aztarac boards. There's really only one expert. There's really not levels of expertise.
One guy.
He's the guy.
It's very often that if he fixes a board, he's the only guy in the world that can fix it.
Yeah.
What'll ever happen when he's gone, who knows?
Yes, and there's many games that have been like that. He's the only guy in the world that can get him to work, and Aztarac is definitely one of those cases. And Aztarac was a challenge for him. He spent easily over 50 hours working on this board to get it working again. Replaced at least 17 components on the board. And it was down to the wire on whether or not the board was going to be working in time for the show. Andy had to leave for a job in Hong Kong about a week and a half ago, and once he hit that, there was no way that he could work on the board, and it was challenging the best guy in the world. He wasn't able to get it working for a long time. And finally, he said, I've got it working. I couldn't go and pick it up. I didn't trust it to UPS, so I asked Quan if he could fly out. He flew out, met Andy, interviewed him, and collected the board and took it back on carry-on luggage and brought it back here. But this didn't mean that we were in the clear. We still had to get the power supply working, and we still had to get the monitor working. And that Wells Gardner 6401 that was mentioned is as rare as the game itself. I've been collecting and restoring and repairing vector games for a very long time, and I'd never seen a Wells Gardner 6401 monitor before in my life. So we didn't know if the monitor was going to work. I spent a weekend building a kit online to replace every component that was in the monitor other than the tube itself and the yoke that drove it. During this whole time too, Brian Jones, who was in the back of the room, there he is, Brian started working on the aesthetic restoration. Sometimes when we restore games, we really restore them. Like, we create new art, we scan the old art, we print new art, we scan the control panel, we build a new control panel. This was not that kind of game. This game was so rare that Brian wanted to do what he called a museum quality restoration, which is to change the absolute minimum of how this game looked, but just clean it up. And he literally cleaned, I think he polished every screw, yes, every screw, every bolt, spent, a day just cleaning the sides of the game and the control panel, and really cleaned it up. But Bill Stillwell, who we know is Hamster in the community, is right over there, got the power supply and rebuilt the power supply, and in the process of rebuilding the power supply, discovered why the game originally stopped working originally, which was a manufacturing defect in the power supply, a cold solder joint. And when the power supply failed, it took out the whole game with it, which is what those early switching power supplies would tend to do. And in addition to the monitors, the Aztarac used a switching power supply, which now is very common, but this was probably one of the first games that used a switching power supply. So we brought everything together. We got the board back from Quan from California. We got the power supply from Bill. Brian had done an intense amount of work cleaning everything. We invited Quan over to the warehouse. We plugged everything back together, and we turned it on, and it made a loud noise from the monitor and just this blooming light from the monitor, which if you're a vector collector, means shut the game off as fast as possible. And the next day, all the parts came in to start rebuilding the monitor. And I gave Ben the parts, and he went over and pulled the monitor out of the game again. In the process of taking the monitor apart, discovered that when we hooked everything back up after photographing every minute detail of the monitor, we forgot to reconnect one grounding line. And we reconnected the grounding line and turned on the game, and everything worked perfectly. So that's where the state of the game now. Even Andy was amazed. He said, I don't understand why a disconnected ground line in the monitor would keep the game from even booting up. It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't have to make sense. That's what happened.
It makes sense now, right?
It makes sense now. So this has been about 11 months.
No, since last time I saw that machine was a year and a half ago.
Year and a half. So yeah, it's been a year and a half. There's been hundreds of hours put in by different individuals. Ben, Brian, Bill, Andy, myself, although my friend Rob will tell you, I don't really actually do any work. I just mostly take credit for work that other people do. But my job is that I get all of those people into the right places in order to get this stuff done. But through the combined effort of all these amazingly talented people, we got the game working again.
Anything else?
Good.
What else we got?
I just thought it'd be. Is that on? There we go. Just to finish up, before we hand over to Walter, who I know wants to say a few things. I just thought this is another letter from Tim. He seems to have a habit of writing a lot to his dad. This was another letter that Tim wrote to his dad just before he joined Century to write the game. And I just thought it was a great quote, and I just thought it would just be a great place to leave the presentation, really. So if you just indulge me for a minute, I'll read for you. So Tim wrote to his father, who clearly had some concerns about Tim's new career choice, writing video games. Tim wrote, "Think of video games as an art form, as I do, and then ask yourself what life would be like without movies, theatre, music, sculpture, exhibits, and so on. Even a golf course designer is an artist of sorts. Video games may not be art with a capital A, but to my way of thinking, anything that pleases and or amuses people and gets them thinking along lines that they might not have thought of before is art. If it happens to be profitable at the same time, then so much the better." And I'm quite sure you'll agree with all of us that when you see the Aztarac machine running, you'll agree with us. It truly is a work of art. Walter, over to you.
In December 1983, I had Twin Galaxies, which now is recognized as history's most famous video game arcade, in Ottumwa, Iowa, the video game capital of the world. It just happened that we were one of those very, very rare arcades that actually had an Aztarac. And you call it Aztarac, but I've never heard it pronounced that way before. Everybody always called it Aztarac, but is it Aztarac? No. It's Aztarac, isn't it?
Aztarac.
Okay. Naughty boy.
Yeah.
No. Sit. So it's Aztarac. So we actually had an Aztarac, and I stood there and watched a lot of people come and play it, and the world record that still stands today, I stood there beside the guy and watched him score it. So it's now, how many years? That would be December of 1983, so that's an amazing thing.
144,000 some points.
Yeah, something like that. It was done by Dennis Bartlett, who's part of the group that organizes the new events that are just starting up now in Ottumwa, the video game capital of the world. However, could everybody with the Stryker family please stand? And please come on up here. And thank you. You guys are unbelievable. You got to do more things like this, Tony. John, you're unbelievable. I didn't even know you exist, John. Get ready for John's trading card next year, okay? And anyway, essentially, when we give a presentation like this, when Billy and I do this, something like this is not just done by my organization or even under the auspices of Billy. This actually is a gift to you on behalf of the global gaming industry. Everybody is involved in this. As we give you an award, I want to unroll it and unveil the official Tim Stryker trading card. So we have a copy of the card for everybody. So on behalf of us, we are honored to present this to you. Realize that you are now part of a tradition that's getting kind of older now. We're in our 7th year of doing this, where we've honored many, many important people who have been substantial contributors to the amazing, amazing global gaming culture, from the oldest days, the very beginning, which Tim is a part of, to even many of the people who are part of the most modern generation of those who are creating it as a bigger and bigger industry and a bigger and bigger sport. Let's hear it. Give them a hand over here.
One of the reasons why we like to do this is there's so many things that happen in the industry. There's so many people that participate in different ways that are just gone from our mind. All of us collectively. But what we do is we look at stuff, we research stuff, we find things that are sometimes considered minute, but have contributed to the culture of video games. And the fact of the matter is that when we create something, when we create a certificate, when we create trading cards, we take it, it's put in writing, it's part of history, it's forever memorialized. The truth is, if we didn't do this, eventually what he achieved would eventually leave the memory of the last person. And it would forever be lost to history. He would never get the credit he deserves. And by doing this, as I say, memorializing it, what he did, what he created, his contribution will literally, it'll live forever and ever. It'll always be there. It'll always be in the collection we created. It'll always have what you hang on your wall. It'll always be on a trading card. And again, his legacy will live forever because that's what we all want. That's the passion we all have, and that's why we all do this here. So it's absolutely congratulations to everything he's ever done.
My big question is, Neil failed to mention that when he opened up the game and opened up and saw all the stuff in there and saw just the one credit on the game, the quarter was still inside there.
Yes, it was.
Dated 1983.
1983, and actually right now, it's still in there. John
Okay,
made sure to leave it in there.
so what do you think the destiny of this game is? How long is it going to last with one play on it?
It's gonna lag because I unplugged it. I made sure they unplugged the other game. And they better not connect it. You heard, John? Don't connect it.
So anyway, so eventually the company that put the games in the Twin Galaxies arcade, that company went out of business. And the truck pulled up and foreclosed on all their games, and that's where the Aztarac disappeared. It went back to Des Moines to a company called Philip and Moss, a distributing company. So who knows where that game has gone. But here's something interesting, Tony. At that time, I distinctly remember that we were talking that there were 200 copies of the game. That's a distinct, clear memory. So that may be the truth of what it was all about. So I'm going to hand these cards out now. And why don't you guys, Neil, why don't you unveil it?
Ace?
If they found an Aztarac, and if they found just any Aztarac, it wouldn't mean that much. The fact that they found this Aztarac, I mean, absolutely means the world. When we go on these different hunts for these different machines at times, we were looking for a Defender at one time. The Defender we found was a Defender that traveled on the road with the band Journey. The Journey we found was a Journey that traveled on the road with Journey. So the fact that we have this Aztarac is 100-fold greater than if we found the one that Walter lost in Iowa. So that makes the moment far more special.
All right.
Now, do we need a drum roll or something?
You ready, guys?
Oh, that could be light. It was light.
I don't do too good on this. Here we go. Give it a second. Between all the collectors, I think we've all agreed that this may be the only machine that has a fisheye bezel. I've never seen another one like it. No other game has it. So it is it's quite interesting of design. I mean, thinking about outside the box, it's really, really different. Eventually, you guys may, Brian, they're gonna be able to come up and walk up to the game.
Yeah, anyone can play it.
They come up to the, okay. So if you guys want, if you want to take a look at it, you want to play it or whatever, you guys can come on, line up, and enjoy a little bit of Aztarac. Ace, please. You want to do it, Karen?
Thank you, everybody.
I'm curious about this. The initials? Yeah, the initials, you gotta give it a second. And I know they kind of caught up, I'm sure.
You could argue that Empire Strikes
That's